Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, January 17th, 2025. I need to say that because of scheduling reasons, this will be the last podcast that we will be recording during the presidency and the era of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. What an honor it's been to live through this time, to analyze it, to view it, to scoff at it, to scorn at it, to worry about it. Thank you for joining us on this horrendous journey, and may we only see brighter days ahead. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Our newly minted social commentary columnist, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor, Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
So as Biden goes out the door and Trump comes in the door, the only joint venture of the outgoing, incoming Biden-Trump administration, the ceasefire and hostage deal between Hamas and Israel has now formally, as I'm speaking, been approved by Israel's security cabinet with a full cabinet vote to come in the next 24 hours. There will be a hostage deal. The first 3 hostages will come out on Sunday. The question that haunts me is whether the Israeli people are prepared for some of the possibly absolutely heartbreaking, heartrending, soul-crushing news that will emerge when these early hostages come out. If they come out and their bodies, and 2 of the bodies are the bodies of small children, the country which may have been living in hope in a certain way that a miracle would be achieved in the form of the lives of the hostages who have survived this captivity. There may be very, very rough times ahead, including, by the way, the discovery by many of the hostages that family members of theirs were murdered on October 7th as they were being kidnapped and taken into Gaza. I mean, we know at least 20 cases in which that is the case. We don't know whether the hostages themselves know that their families were killed. You can imagine that Hamas might let them know just as a form of psychological torment and torture, since some of the latest information that we have that is now dribbling out is how the 6 people who were executed during the last rescue attempt in September were basically tortured as they were murdered. Word that Hersh Goldberg Poland, who of course lost one of his arms, was shot in his other extremities before he was killed, just to put paid on the evil that was done him, and that he should know that this was coming rather than a swift, quick execution. So the Israeli people want this. Clearly, the government's not going to fall. The event, it's going to happen. And this is what they want, and maybe it's what they need. And as Dan Senor said on our podcast yesterday, Israel being in the strongest position it has been militarily vis-a-vis its enemies since 1967, if you were going to take a stab at doing something that might be momentarily militarily or strategically injurious, this would be the time to do it. I just don't know psychologically if Israel is prepared for the worst news that it could get. And that, of course, will have its own consequences. Maybe that's not something that is of all that much interest or really is a matter of concern in terms of policy making or in terms of how we as Americans should view this deal, which of course ceases all military operations for 6 weeks as the 33 of the 98 hostages are released, some of them dead, some of them living. Seth, you referred to this last night in a post on our website as Schrodinger's deal. Do you want to elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's
it's happening, then it's not, then it's happening, then it's not, and we seemingly get announcements that all the details have been ironed out. We use the word. I think the word "iron" has been printed in the news more this week than maybe in its entire existence leading up to this week, and that. And then we hear that, well, there's maybe a problem. So and so is discussing with so and so, and there's but the problem with this process is that have to, by necessity, go through a series of interlocutors. And so what you're hearing is a game of telephone, then spun to you, the public. So when the Qatari foreign minister tells a friendly reporter that something is holding up the negotiations, there's no way to know how true that is or what that means, besides for the fact that there is some delay. And so part of the frustration here, and this will go on, and I'll explain in a second, is the lack of knowledge of what is about to happen. And that will continue through the ceasefire, even if it is carried out, because the Israeli government has not been informed yet who among the 33 hostages for the first round of release are still alive. Meaning it's not just that we don't know, it's that the Israeli government doesn't know, Hamas hasn't said, and the reports are that they'll get a report 7 days into the ceasefire that will tell them who among the 33 are alive, and I give them reports and stuff like that. So there's an element to this that is just, no matter what, we feel in the dark, and we feel like we can't trust it, and we feel like we don't know whether we can say for sure if something is happening, if the deal is alive or dead. That's the Schrodinger's deal. It all feels like, until the moment it happens, we won't know if it was ever going to happen. And Israel has tried to do some things to smooth that out. One is there's unconfirmed reports in the media that Israel has demanded living hostages first. That doesn't mean necessarily all of the living hostages before all of the deceased hostages, but at least in the first 8 days or so, the hostages that come out, they want to be alive. Precisely, John, because of what you said. The Israelis are thinking about this too, and the Israeli government has been thinking about this too, and thinking about how to soften the blow. And they understand that if the first hostages that come out are the bodies of children, it will change the way this deal is viewed, and it will immediately reduce the patience the public has for all of this, and it will cause some rebellion among the coalition. I mean, how, as you mentioned, how each stage of this hits the public emotionally is part of even the negotiations for the Israelis. That's how delicate this is.
One of the things that strikes me about the last few weeks is how and I don't say this as a criticism, this is what happens when deal making, as Seth described, especially, multiple layers of communication channels, deal making goes on. Two things. One, the fact that the Biden administration and Tony Blinken in particular are finally saying out loud what we all knew to be the case, which is that every time Israel came to the table, Hamas screwed the deal. Now, they weren't saying that publicly, right? They had all these weasel words for describing why negotiations weren't working, and they'd often even blame Israel for not, giving up enough, et cetera, et cetera. Now he's saying more frequently, as he's about to walk out the door, oh yeah, Hamas keeps messing up the deal. He said it the other night, like there are some things that have come up. But the second thing, and this is really crucial, the way that the public, not just the public in Israel, but particularly in the United States, understands this conflict, we need to remind the public that taking children as hostages is that's crime. That's an international crime, right? You're not supposed to hold children.
Taking anyone
well,
hostage,
any hostages, right?
This is the kind of this
but this let me
elevates it to a kind of mythical crime. It's like Medea killing her children. I mean,
right,
it has a quality of
And so we have actually established groups like the Red Cross and Red Crescent who will even work with terrorist organizations like Hamas to ensure the safety and the lack of mistreatment of hostages. And Hamas did not even allow Red Crescent in to this is why we don't know who's alive and who's dead, because in this conflict in particular, a terrorist organization has dominated the propaganda war in the West with stories about genocide and all these sorts of, reactionary responses. And we've lost the plot when it comes to the actual people who are suffering here. And these are young children; these are babies. And we talk about it on the podcast. But I think stepping back and from a 30,000-foot view, saying even if you're concerned about how Palestinians are treated, you should also be concerned with how Hamas has treated these hostages, and the fact that the international community has just kind of sat on its hands and gone, well, what can we do? And this frustrates me because the taking of children, the taking of any hostages, as you say, but the taking of children in particular, what a horrific thing. And I think we've almost become numb to precisely what this group has done and the torment
Also,
it has inflicted.
can I, the fact that we don't know who's alive and who's dead points to how sick this whole process is. That, like, what kind of negotiating partner is this that says, we're not going to tell you who's living, who's dead. You'll find out after you sign right there. This is a sickness, and they're maniacal, evil, and they have been elevated into this status of legitimacy, in part by this process. I mean, not in our minds, but just the fact of their entering into this. That's what's so distressing.
40 years ago, it was the general policy of the West after events in the 1970s where negotiations with hostage takers and terrorist organizations by European nations, particularly Germany, Italy, some other places, led to the release that we've now seen Israel do subsequently, the release of prisoners, the escape from justice, the decision not to prosecute anybody in order to get the hostages out. None of which, in Germany and Italy's case, led to a cessation of terrorist violence. Rather, there was an acceleration leading in 1979 to the murder of Italy's prime minister, Aldo Moro, by a terrorist group. And at that point, some of those principles, some of that shut down. The idea was, the American position was, we don't negotiate with terrorists, and that then a lot of European countries, or the general sense was, you can't, this is empowering more hostage taking, more terrorist activity, and things got tougher. And then, of course, the United States started easing up on its own way that it was dealing with this stuff with the Iran-Contra deal and various other mistakes that we made, as Israel itself started playing negotiating games with, in part because of the international atmosphere, with the PLO, which was, of course, a terrorist organization that was, as Abe, you say, kind of elevated into the status of a legitimate political actor after the Gulf War, leading to the Oslo Accords, leading to two terrorist wars conducted against Israel by the PLO, after it was granted what everybody thought it supposedly wanted, which was a pathway to a Palestinian state. Turns out they didn't want a pathway to a Palestinian state. They want to destroy Israel and remain a thuggish goon squad terrorist group. Here we are, it's like 30 years later, and here we are again in a world in which a group that is arguably the worst terrorist organization that we've ever seen is now being treated, and this is the grief to me, by the incoming Trump administration and its negotiator, Steve Witkoff, as a counterparty at a table. and they have what they want, and Israel has what it wants, and everybody's got to give a little bit on either side. Just like if you were doing a real estate negotiation, if you want $100,000 off the price tag, then you're going to have to pay for the renovation of the basement. That's not the person that's selling you the house isn't going to renovate the basement. You're going to have to do that. That's how we come to a deal. Everything is fine. Demoralize. Don't treat this as though it was an emotional thing. Treat it as though you want to get to a deal. Well, again, I don't want to like indulge in sadomasochistic fantasy or something like that, but Donald Trump is going to say on Monday in his inaugural address that he has shown the world that even before he became president a second time, he was willing to do what was necessary to get wonderful things done, and he has freed the hostages. And if Sunday afternoon, 2 or 3 dead bodies come out, or if that's what happens on Friday, a week from the next 7 days after, when the next tranche of hostages, 4 more hostages come out, and they're the B-bus babies. How's that going to make him look? How's
Well,
that? Israel is focused on this. Christine, you're saying the world hasn't been paying attention. So Israel has been focused on very little other
right.
than the agony, aside from
But it
disruption
also
of war. Yeah.
it also is a missed opportunity for Trump in this sense. Treating, even by default, Hamas as a negotiating partner, as you described, does in some sense give them a bit of legitimacy. But there's a broader problem going on here, and that's the defense of the West, the defense of Western civilization. And I am being hyperbolic on purpose. Islamic terrorism is spreading around the globe, not just on Israel's borders, not just in Iran, but in Western Europe. We've seen terrorist acts in the United States again in the homeland, motivated by Islamic terrorism. And I remember, post 9/11, there was this really concerted effort on both sides of the political aisle to say, we need to understand how this happened. Why do they hate us? Remember that. But Islam is a religion of peace. And so we want to really just walk this very fine line. We are at a moment now, civilizationally, where I think we need to be a little more firm in what we're up against and what our values are, because we assumed everyone understood our values. Our values are in disarray. I think the Biden administration's term is a good example of that domestically, but on the global stage, nobody knows what America stands for anymore. And so this is an opportunity. An inaugural address is exactly that moment where a president can say, here is what we stand for. And it's not that we're going to go around and spread democracy everywhere, but everyone in this world, our enemies and our friends, should know what we value and what we stand for. And I fear he is perhaps not the person for that moment. I hope I'm wrong, but this is a broader war. It is not just happening in Israel; it's happening across the globe.
It's a broader war because it's on our borders, right? One of the things that people worry about in terms of the open border is whether or not terrorist groups are using the open border to preposition people in the United States to commit terrorist acts. The Trump people who are very concerned about about illegal immigration and the border talk about it all the time. Talk about how Venezuela, maybe sending people up north with those caravans, and who knows where they're from and what their ultimate aim is. And yet there is still a commitment to a certain type of isolationist rhetoric on the part of at least MAGA. Trump is a slightly different matter. I mean, his isolationist rhetoric now is largely taking the form of economic isolationism in the form of tariff impositions, where it's like, the world is a zero-sum game. Either you pay to get into our markets, or our taxpayers pay, and so we're going to make you pay, and then we'll take from you. And as opposed to the idea that economic growth and the intermingling of economic assets across
But this is really important. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
please.
This is the thing where Reagan did this very well, right? We talked about economic wealth and capitalism and being a good thing, but there was a values argument he made as well. I feel like Trump's transactionalism is very much talking about the money piece of that, but not the values, except for these vague feints that make America great again. I want to hear that values piece for his second term. I want to know what he thinks this country stands for and where its place is in the world.
Well, I think, it's an excellent point, and I think what Trump and Biden share is that their fallback position is diffuse, diffuse, diffuse at all costs. Um, we don't want to stir up Putin. We don't want to stir up a wider regional war. It's this choice between expediency and morale and values, and that's there's no happy middle ground. I mean, you take
Right.
it
So at
as
10 a.m. At 10 a.m. today, we're recording this. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. At 10, the Supreme Court is apparently due to release its decision on the law, on the constitutionality of the law that said that TikTok must sell itself if it is continue working inside the United States. Note when you talk about diffuse, that for 3 years, TikTok has been a target of Republican, conservative. TikTok's bad for people. It's collecting massive data on people. It's a Chinese Communist Party adjunct that has this cutout company in the United States that supposedly owns it, but we know it doesn't really. And so, as a matter of national security, TikTok needs to be sold and no longer the property of the Chinese government. The Chinese government basically says, we're just going to close it down. We're not even going to sell it, which seems psychotic, right? Because it's probably worth tens of, at least you
But
might
it
get some
does
money
give the
out of it.
game away for what TikTok is
Right.
the purpose of TikTok.
Right. Why do I bring this up? Because Donald Trump, defending America, in a world gone mad, changed his tune on TikTok. Has the CEO of U.S. TikTok coming to sit on the dais behind him at the inaugural. I don't know what's going to happen if the decision goes the way of the law that Congress passed and that Biden signed is constitutional and therefore must go forward. I don't really understand, is Trump then going to have the guy behind him whose company by law and then by Supreme Court fiat has been ruled a sufficient danger to the U.S. national security that it can no longer operate in the United States, sitting next to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos? That's not good. Why did he do it? We know why he did it. Jeff Yass, huge fundraiser for him, billionaire guy, big investor in TikTok, told him not to do it. I bring this up only to say that the idea of infusing that even Trump's America First, which has a moral frame to it, right? I mean, it dates back to the Washington's farewell address, right? We entangling alliances in the world are going to corrupt us. We are a new nation with new value, new ways of looking at things, and we cannot get ourselves dirtied by the rest of the world. That's one of the foundational ideas of the United States that we have been fighting over for, almost, 240 years. So he is there with the moralism about how they're taking our jobs or this, we need to be our own and have our own. And because that evokes Washington's idea about America's exceptionalism. But then, he's just willing to say, no, it's fine. TikTok's fine. I don't want you to do this.
And
My
aside
friend
from
Jeff says it's a bad idea. I trust him. I don't know who all these people are. Meanwhile, like major figures in his party who were supporters of his, like Tom Cotton and others, they believe that TikTok is Tom Cotton, now head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, believes that TikTok is a present danger to the United States.
And he's absolutely right about
So
that.
Trump is only entering office now having within two transactional alterations of his view, one of which was they better let the hostages out. So first of all, they're not letting the hostages out. They're going to let 33 hostages out in 6 weeks. 10 of them are likely to be dead. 65 will remain in. He didn't get them out. Biden didn't get them out. On the day of his inaugural, 3 are going to get out. On the day of Reagan's inaugural, 52 Americans were released by Iran. All of the hostages.
all of them.
So
Right.
if that is his model, he failed. He did not get what he wanted. He is a a pissant Reagan in this regard, right? He got,
But I
I
think
don't know,
there's
a 13th.
also
He got a 13th of what Reagan got.
it's
Mazel tov to him.
it's not just values though, which is half the problem. The other half of the problem is that Trump's vision for America first includes a lot of that's not our problem. That's the other half of this, right? There's the values part, which is what do we believe and what are we trying to defend? And then there's the whether or not we believe this, is it any of our business to get involved and to defend it? Should we be defending the Western Democratic Alliance in Ukraine, right? He may believe one thing, but do another because of this idea that we don't want, that it's sort of none of our concern. And there's a lot of the none of our concern stuff floating around. And the worry regarding the hostages is that the American hostages come out and then there's all dozens of hostages left, that it becomes less of his problem, less of his concern for a guy who is quick to say that sort of thing.
By the way, there is no indication that the American hostages are going to be among the first to come out. There is a list of hostages. We don't know what the order is, but if you look at the list, the priority is women and and children and the elderly, and that's not the American hostages, most of whom, what are there, 6 left, 5 left, are supposedly military age men. So meaning that they are then viewed almost as soldiers, even if they're not even if they were not in the military.
But this issue of not our problem actually has I think it's important because it has a very long tail. And you see it in the sort of MAGA side of Republicanism saying, we know how to solve this problem. We'll just get rid of all of DEI. Now, as all our listeners know, we are not fans of all the DEI regimes. But that misses the broader civilizational challenge, which is that those problems that are declared not our problems are here anyway. They're on college campuses where both faculty and students are saying, tear down Western civilization. They're there every time a statue of one of the founders is torn down in some angry mob. And again, this is a bit of hyperbole. This isn't happening every day, but the challenge, the problem is already on our own home front. So if the idea is, yeah, we don't care about Ukraine, we don't care about the Middle East, we care about what's going on at home, it's all connected now, because that the ideology that is fueling Hamas is the same, has very similar principles to the anti-Western ideology we see on our college campuses. And as much as people don't want to acknowledge that, the people who are supporting regimes like Hamas, terrorist groups like ISIS on college campuses, they will tell you to your face that they do support that. They think the West is evil, and they feel they are in a civilizational battle.
Look, Seth brings up we don't have, there are things we might want to care about, but it's not our problem, or we have to deal with problems here at home. That is, to be fair, that calculation is the calculation of all American post-war foreign policy. How much in theory, we are for democratic movements in every country in the world. We are opposed to totalitarian countries. Totalitarianism has a kind of internationalist, globalist connection. All these countries are the same. They all deal with each other. They're all our enemies, to Christine's point. We are a civilizational bulwark against them. They wish to destroy us. But from 1956 onward, America has had to make choice after choice about how far it was willing to go to intervene to advance this broader or more, theoretical interest. Like, does it matter to us if the Hungarian people are being oppressed in 1956? Yeah, it matters. Does it matter enough for Dwight Eisenhower to commit U.S. forces to help the Hungarian Revolution not be overtaken by the Soviets? No, because the Soviets have nuclear weapons. We don't know what the consequences are, or atomic weapons then, I guess. I don't even know. I can't remember where we were on the atomic versus nuclear scale here. But we don't know what the consequences are, and the risk is not worth the reward. We have had that throughout the last 80 years. It is part of every calculation.
But with one difference now, and this is actually where TikTok and other social media platforms are important, the ideological and cultural war that is being waged by our enemies into the minds of most Americans, particularly young Americans, that is very new, because the propaganda war that happened during the Cold War was real, and people who try to downplay it are lying to you, and it did have some negative effects on cultural and social life in the United States. But now, actually, we don't even want to acknowledge that this is a form of warfare. It is a propaganda war. It is highly effective, and it's very difficult to combat in the sort of traditional ways we used to combat those sorts of wars. So that's why I know I'm a TikTok
No,
fanatic.
but you're absolutely right. But I think
I,
I don't view Trump as somebody who actually looks at this and says, we want freedom in China. I don't think he cares
No, that's true.
about
Yeah.
freedom in China. He genuinely doesn't. And by the way, I think he should. He doesn't. A lot of people don't. A lot of people think this is not something that we should, or they have a different civilizational structure, and they don't have our ideas, and they're not born in our culture, and so this idea that freedom comes as God, is given to us by God, and that every person is as free as every other person is not a global idea. It certainly doesn't govern Confucian thinking. It doesn't govern Hindu thinking. It doesn't govern all kinds of religious thinking everywhere. The kind of the idea that all people are equal in the eyes of God, or are infused with liberty given by God. And it's clear that Trump doesn't believe that. So, okay, I get that. And he won the election, and he made a lot of that very clear. And he gets to work out his foreign policy the way that see where it goes. I don't think it's
I,
a successful way to pursue this, but
right.
okay. So I'm just saying,
Co-
like, I think then the question is, Trump thinks he won a scored a big victory in
Oh yeah.
this deal. He may be disabused of that notion by the world reaction to what we're actually going to see over the next 6 weeks.
I'm not sure. I mean, because we can be more in the weeds than we realize we are. I hate to describe what you're
It's true.
talking about as in the
Yeah.
weeds, but
No, you're
I
right.
think people see hostage is released, and they go, "Oh, that's good. What's for lunch?" Kind of thing. The history that you described, John, about the sort of choices that America has faced since the war, is totally accurate. But there always comes along someone who says, "Ooh, this is none of our business," must be taken as an ironclad first principle. That's the way we have to proceed, and that's what we've been getting wrong, and this will solve all of our international problems and some of our domestic problems, and that's always wrong. When you are inflexible on that point, just as, by the way, there are people, and I know them, who are like, no, we must always intervene.
Right.
I think I used to be one of them.
Yeah.
That's wrong too.
Right.
This has been an episode of Commentary Confessions with you.
No, but I think a very important point relating to Ukraine here, which is Ukraine does not exist in a vacuum. By which I mean, this is a war that's been going on for almost 3 years now. And the Ukrainians have shown an extraordinary capacity to suffer losses and to embarrass and humiliate and make life incredibly difficult for Russia. Had that not been the case in 2022, had Russia marched through Ukraine, the idea that we should be supporting Ukraine to the best of our abilities and all that, that would have faced this real world test. Ukraine would have failed it, and Russia would have succeeded. It is actually a weird refusal to look at the world as it is and things as they've gone, to say, I didn't care about Ukraine in 2022. I don't care about it now. It's not our business. And you know what else? I don't like that guy. I don't like the cut of that Zelensky's jib. I hear he's mean to Christians because he believes that the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is a spy network for Moscow, which it is.
Yeah, where would he get that idea?
Okay. Anyway, I'm just saying that, so this kind of thing happens, and what happens in Ukraine, what has happened, does not budge and may even stiffen the resolve of people who thought in 2022, this is not our fight and this is not our problem. Sometimes opportunistically, we could say, you know what? Giving Putin a lot of trouble over here is a way of making sure that he doesn't make trouble over here. It's good for us and the West at very low cost for Putin to be bogged down in Ukraine if the Ukrainians are willing to suffer the burden of being the boggards downers and being the ones who are getting killed by Russia. And that's where the MAGA stuff starts getting counter ideological. It's like, it's not about the world as it is, and you guys are all psychotic idealists who have globalist fantasies. It's more like, why aren't you looking at the way things are and saying, again, risk reward calculation, this is a low risk, high return operation for us. We don't have to spend very much money, and we're getting a big return for it, just like we could make this claim about Iran now, taking out Iran's nuclear program and its oil export facilities so that it can be crippled as a force for bad in the world, is now as low cost as it will ever be, or as any such threat has ever been. Are we going to look at this realistically and say, let's do it?
But
And the issue, I think, isolationist thinking has a more religious and ideological frame than it claims to have.
okay, so what will happen with Taiwan? The Taiwanese are not going to fight back like the Ukrainians have, and they are reliant still on Chinese energy. So China can just basically pull the plug and just wait. What will we do then? Because I think a lot of the arguments that were made in MAGAland against Ukraine, I mean, what are they going to do when, our trading partner here's China big footing into Taiwan? What will the response be? That's actually, I think, where you do need a values-based response, which is you can't just go into this region. I mean, right now we're monitoring the sea there, but they can do that at any point. And how will a Trump MAGA world view of things, highly transactional, very much about deal making? How does that work in the case of Taiwan? I don't know.
Well, I also think, by the way, to add to that, there's the problem of we have been guaranteeing, we have been overseeing the American-led world order, and a lot of the sort of MAGA America First isolationist people don't wish that hadn't been the case, but it has been the case, right? So we were the ones who negotiated the Ukrainians giving up what would have been the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world in 94, was it? And in return, put them under our security umbrella, right? It was in the deal, and it was a good idea as long as everybody upheld their end of the deal, right? We didn't know what Ukraine was going to turn out to be. There were nukes under the ground in like Kazakhstan and places were making us crazy. We didn't have time to say like, well, 30 years from now, we feel like, there might be a Jewish president of this, Jewish anti-Putin, pro-democracy president of it was just like, clean it up. The world has nukes lying around, clean them up. So the deal was and remains the right idea, but if you just sort of leave your own responsibility, if we don't uphold it, there's that. Then there's what I think Christine was also sort of getting at, which is like people watch this and say they didn't hold up their end of the deal on Ukraine. If I'm Taiwan, they didn't hold up their end of the deal on Ukraine. If I'm in the Middle East, they didn't hold up their end of the deal on this or that. There's this other question of if you are thinking in the America First frame, what do you do with the responsibilities we have already taken upon ourselves, the deals we have already agreed to, and the obligations we are already on the hook for?
That's a very brilliant little analysis there, because I just had this very vulgar analogy to offer. And it's like this. So we made this deal in 94. We said, we're going to make sure that you are not going to suffer for your territory is secure. You give up nuclear weapons, we're going to make sure that, you know, your country survives. That was 30 years ago. Okay, so let me just compare this to something that happened in New York, in real estate terms, because it'll help Trump as an understanding of Trump. 1972, the New York Philharmonic sells the naming rights to Philharmonic Hall to a man named Avery Fisher. Philharmonic Hall becomes Avery Fisher Hall. I don't know what he gave the money, named Avery Fisher Hall. 25 years later, something like that, they want to redo Philharmonic Hall. They wanted to redo Avery Fisher Hall. So the idea is, you know what? Let's sell the name again. We'll sell it to David Geffen. He'll give us $100 million. We'll rebuild the hall. Now it'll be David Geffen Hall. Avery Fisher's family says, whoa, wait a minute. He gave you all this money in 1972. You renamed it Avery Fisher Hall. They said, we've gone through the contract. And actually, the words in perpetuity didn't appear in the contract, or some version of that. Or maybe they appeared, but there's also another phrase that says something else. And yeah, go ahead, take us to court. Let's see what happens. We need the money. So if you're going to, now this small lesson in world, you know, in sort of like pragmatic world fundraising would say everybody from now on who gets naming, who is, you know, in Kansas City names the Performing Arts Center, better have a lawyer make sure that it says this name will be on the building for 150 years, or you're not going to give the money in the first place. Because it didn't occur to anybody that this was necessary. Just like the word of the United States was gold. Well, guess what? It turns out it's not gold anymore, because for transactional reasons, we don't want to stand behind the promise we made in 94. And I wasn't alive then. And I was in bankruptcy in 1994 because of what I did in Atlantic City. I wasn't even in politics. What do I know? I don't have to hold to the deal that we made in 1994. Well, you kind of do. You really are supposed to. But all right, who's going to make you? I mean, it's so, again, that's a very vulgar way of looking at it, but it is like, either you believe in sacrosanct promises and that the full faith and credit of the United States has to stand behind promises, even ones that you don't like anymore, because of a more abstract understanding of what sovereignty and nationhood and leadership and all of that are, or you're just, it's year one when I enter politics and nothing that happened before me do I have to give a crap about. And that's where Trump is a danger, if he's a danger. And that's why, you know, maybe it can lead to very creative thinking. You're not in the hammerlock of the Biden world, in which Biden's like, well, in 1973, I met with so-and-so, and so therefore I know that you can't, you know, he can't change anything up in sort of conventional, you know, foreign policy thinking.
I just want to say, what's fascinating to me, though, is that among our allies, our international allies, and people in the know in their governments and whatnot, and this is something I've experienced firsthand in a number of countries, and it's kind of been startling to me. It includes Ukraine, includes the Kurds back in the Bush days. They see America as unreliable on this long-term question of keeping promises from administration to administration. They are very savvy about that. They love us anyway. They do, because they've sort of already internalized and reckoned with that. We understand what America stands for, and we understand the reality, and we don't fall in love with any given politician. We have to. Playing the long game means understanding that this happens in the U.S.
Well, that's when values used to undergird the transactionalism that has always occurred in foreign policy. And actually, the Abraham Accords are a good example of a value and transactionalism, getting some of those countries to the table and saying, hey, economically, this is a good deal for you. Here's all the reasons why you should, open up your relationships. And it worked. I think the problem now, the horrifying example I'll give is all of those people who we paid to serve as our translators in Afghanistan, who the Biden administration utterly abandoned to death, to destruction, the minute he decided to do that disastrous pullout. We had a transactional relationship with some of these citizens, but we also had a value, which was, if you do this for us at risk to yourselves and your families, we will make sure that you're taken care of if things go south. And when it came time for us we loved the transaction. It benefited us and our troops. The minute we had to actually stand by our values, we abandoned those people. And there are lots of examples like that in the recent past that I think Trump needs to attend to when he starts thinking about what are MAGA foreign policy values, and who in his administration is going to be the person or people who are the ones promoting them.
Can I jump in with an early commentary recommends based entirely on what you said spontaneously, because of the story because of the Afghan translator story. I really do want to recommend a remarkable movie that I don't think very few people have seen. Came out 2 years ago, called The Covenant, made by Guy Ritchie, starring Jake Gyllenhaal as an American, as a Green Beret master sergeant, who goes back into Afghanistan to rescue his translator, who had rescued him, who had saved him after an ambush. It's a remarkable movie, and it's a personal story. It's not a geopolitical story, but it has, as all such things, does have a deep moral component. Very surprising movie, given the person who made it, Guy Ritchie, who is a very unserious and gimmicky and jokey filmmaker. This is his only earnest movie. Gyllenhaal is remarkable in it. Anyway, I really do think, since we're having this conversation, people should see The Covenant. It's gripping. It's a thriller. It's not like a foreign policy lecture. It's a gripping, thrilling, American Sniper lone survivor adventure rescue story that I think is really very well worth your time. Let's move on to the waning the last 3 days of the Biden administration. There was a big story in the New York Times this morning about, told largely from the perspective of Chuck Schumer, the now blessedly gone, now no longer Senate Majority Leader, my senator. Disgrace, immoral, sellout, guy, hypocrite, just beneath contempt person. So you know how I feel about him. Anyway, he tells the New York Times the story of what really happened when it was time that leadership of the Democratic Party believed that Joe Biden had to step down in July of 2024 after the disastrous debate in June. Abe, you want to give people a flavor of what?
Well, it's quite juicy, because among the things that jumped out of it for me, one was that it reveals that Chuck Schumer had been in a panic of sorts about Biden's abilities before the debate. And he viewed the debate, as the piece says, as a gift, because he was scared to speak the truth to Biden or to others. And he was one of the biggest cheerleaders for the public-facing notion that Biden's great and doing just fine. So he viewed the debate as a gift. Now he had to face Biden and say what he had to say. And I also appreciated because the whole thing is about, he went from Brooklyn to Delaware to Biden's house to have this one-on-one with him, and to say, you gotta drop out because we'll lose all the beautiful work we've done, and worse, you'll go down in history as a dark figure.
One of the darkest figures in American history is the phrase he says he used with Biden.
And
remember, what's important about this story, as we talk about it, is that Schumer is the sole source. There are anecdotes here where there's nobody else in the room. So, and Schumer, just to put it in, I believe in the highest. I want to really be Shakespearean here. Is a bullshit artist of very high order, and like you can't believe a word that comes out of his mouth. I don't know that any of this is true, or that the anecdotes are true. I'm perfectly willing to believe that none of it is true, but he wants you to think that it's true. So then the question is, why does he want you to think it's true? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and then so one of the juicier moments was when Schumer was discussing the issue with Barack Obama, and Obama said, "Look, I'm not the guy to tell Joe Biden. There's a lot of, he has his back up. He has a chip on his shoulder. There's a lot of like handling Biden's temper in this piece." And Obama says he still has a chip on his shoulder over my choosing Hillary over him, to lead to as the next Democratic nominee, which we always knew, but hadn't. I love to see it there like that. Hadn't penetrated, because I'm remembering back to the 2020 election when Biden and Obama had this sit down. They were like buddies. Do you remember this? Like this little conversation they had just between the two of them, that was released to reinforce the idea about how close and they were and whatnot. Meanwhile, jump to 2024, and Obama's still like, "I'm not the right guy to approach him with this. Believe me."
Well, this
I
is
mean,
the temperament. The temperament point is important both for. So I actually, my theory is that while Biden and Jill Biden are both doing this desperate legacy burnishing in the last, the waning weeks of the administration, because these are the people, remember, who are constantly tweeting like character is on the ballot, decency is on the ballot, and now it's kind of a desperate cry for help. Schumer and other Democratic Party leaders are doing a little bit more nuanced effort at reputation management and revising the historical record as well. Because when you think 10 years from now, when someone goes back to assess Schumer's legacy during the Biden administration, this is the big piece Schumer wants them to read first to shape and frame how they're going to understand his role, rather than, oh my God, he was another one of these guys covering up for the mental and physical decline of the commander in chief.
I mean, look, we knew that Pelosi was going for Biden's jugular around the time this story took place, right? Because someone interviewed her and said, should Biden stay in the race? And she said publicly, that's a decision he is going to have to make for himself. She did not say yes. She did not say
after he had already said he was staying in the race. That's
exactly.
why it was such a shift.
Right. Okay. So Jill Biden complained about Nancy Pelosi in this interview she gave to the Washington Post on Wednesday, where she said, I thought she was our friend. It's like, well, you know what? As Harry Truman said, you want a friend in Washington, get a dog, number one. And number two, she's your friend. Your husband is president of the United States and is senile, and you are a power-hungry, power-mad lunatic. What kind of friend? You're now claiming that you were betrayed by your friend. Maybe you betrayed the United States, lady. Maybe you should step back a minute and think about what it is that you're saying. So Pelosi was willing. She didn't quite stab him in the front, right? I mean, she kind of stabbed him in the side or kind of like on the shoulder.
But in the realm of politics, she was the most honest at that moment.
Right.
She was the one who was being honest.
Right.
And I mean, she pushed him out a window in Prague, is what she did.
Exactly. Okay, so what's fascinating about this story on the part of Schumer is Schumer saying, I went to him privately and I said some very, very hard things that probably really made a difference. And what he is not addressing and what Pelosi is not addressing and what nobody is addressing is they knew a year earlier that he couldn't possibly be president of the United States and shouldn't be then. And think about the one person in the Democratic Party who was willing to put his money where his mouth is, an obscure congressman named Dean Phillips, who stood up, said, I'm going to have to run for office. I don't have a prayer. I have to run for president because somebody in this race has to say Biden is not mentally fit to be president of the United States, and what they did to him and what the liberal media did to him and the way they treated him, the one honest man in his party, right? That's the story that needs to be told. And Schumer saying that he said after the debate, oh, you got to get out of the race. Wow. What bravery, what courage, what fortitude it took him. And I just want to read the concluding section here after he says, the darkest and all of that. Biden says, I need a week after he says the hard stuff, as he ushered Mr. Schumer into a small elevator to exit the House. By the way, why does Schumer need the elevator? Guess who needs the elevator? Biden
this is
can't
at the beach
apparently
house. This
even.
isn't at the, this is at one of the beach houses,
So
right?
Biden apparently can't even go up and down stairs, is what I'm learning from this. Okay. The president put two hands on the senator's shoulders and offered a quintessentially Biden-esque bit of hyperbole. You've got bigger balls than anyone I've ever met, he said. The two embraced as Schumer headed back to his car, where he broke down in tears as he recounted the meeting to his aides. We don't know that this happened. The story doesn't even say according to Mr. Schumer or Mr. Schumer
farther
accounts.
than we don't know if this happened. I would be very confident in saying we know this didn't happen. This isn't a romance novel. This is, this is a senator spinning what happened. And, the reason he's doing so is because, and I'm guilty, I wrote something along these lines too, but after Pelosi, pulled out the knife and cleaned it off and put it back in its sheath, she was the one who got the headlines about, having the intestinal fortitude in the party. She was the one who everybody was saying, she will, if something has to be done, she's the one who'll get her hands dirty. And I think, Schumer just wants to have something on the record out there saying, me too, I also have courage.
But what's so comical about wanting to be cast in this heroic light for posterity here is that what's the biggest headline out of all this, out of 2024? Trump won anyway. Like you didn't save anything from your perspective.
I want to point out that this piece is written by Annie Carney and Luke Broadwater, and here's the bio, because this is very telling. Annie Carney and Luke Broadwater, congressional correspondents at the Times, are the co-authors of, quote, of Madhouse, how Donald Trump, MAGA Mean Girls, a former used car salesman, a Florida Nepo baby, and a man with rats in his walls broke Congress, from which this article is adapted. So they have a book coming out. This article is from the book. Schumer obviously gave them an interview in that classic way where it's like, you could only put this out, after the election, whatever. We don't know when this happened. This book isn't called Madhouse, How the Democratic Party Covered Up for a Senile President. That's the book I want to read. That is the book that everybody in America should want to read. That is the book that historians are going to need. And you know what? That book is never going to be written by people who are going to write it honestly. There are going to be 30 versions. Regnery will publish 30 versions of that book. In one form or another.
In a way, this is that book in the sense that there is a habit by members of the media who value their insider status and their access. There is a habit of writing the book with a different tone than it will be read, right? And I think this is one of those books that is written with the tone of Schumer, the heroic, and here was what went on behind the scenes. But I think if you're reading the book after the election, you are sort of thinking, you almost can't ignore the fact that this is a description of a cover-up in its own way. And if you're a member of the Democratic Party or, especially an activist within the Democratic Party, you're reading an account of how the party leaders destroyed any opportunity to beat Trump and win the election 2024, right? The audience who reads these.
Okay, but the United States, for the good of the United States going forward, and for the proper administration of the laws and the Constitution of the United States going forward, we need to know what was going on inside the Biden White House so that it can never happen again. And I don't know whether we know everything that happened in the Nixon White House because that was a Republican White House, and everybody in it was every man for himself, and they knew they could get good book contracts, writing, hit jobs on what went on, including people who went to jail like Haldeman and Ehrlichman and all of
And
that.
they were taped.
James Dean, John
Right.
Dean,
They
others,
recorded
the tapes,
the White
right?
House conversation.
Yeah, and the tapes, right? Okay, and so that is a very, we know, and Woodward and Bernstein getting whatever they got from Henry Kissinger and others on the final days. We know a lot about what went on in that White House. We need to know what went on in this White House, and this is a real test of character and patriotism or whatever on the part of people, not only writers, but also the people inside who clearly were put in a Hobson's choice about what it means to be loyal, what it means to be loyal to your party, worrying about giving detail and strength to the side you think is evil and is going to destroy the country. We need to know what happened. And there are more early warning systems, right? We already went through this in the 1960s after John F. Kennedy's death, and word coming out about just not only stuff about Woodrow Wilson's presidency and his infirmities that had come out in the 40 years after, but also people saying, John F. Kennedy was on 12 different medications every day, and nobody ever knew. And in fact, Ben Bradley, his best friend, was the reporter. Like, there was an active cover up of what he was like and what he was living like, because he had befriended the press so much. And in the end, that led to the 25th Amendment being passed because of these sorts of issues and issues about presidential succession. And we have to know what went on there. And I'm worried that we're never going to know, because the media are complicit and corrupt, and they knew at the time and they lied then. And somebody is going to have to tell the story. And maybe it can be a right-wing historian. I don't know how he gets in to find out the details, but I mean, at least somebody will try to lay out the tale.
Right. They have a sort of a pact, a blood pact or a suicide pact. It was because nobody resigned over it.
Right.
Nobody said, I can't, even in the way, after January 6th.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know whether Ron Klain, for all we know, resigned because he's
but I mean,
what?
People
this is too exhausting. I can't be president.
But also, by the way, I love the Times running this, because this is the same paper, along with a billion others, that at the time Biden dropped out, said he made this decision. What a great, selfless decision that he made on his own, the bravest, for the good of the country, for the hardest decision to the. Yeah. And now it's like Schumer desperately went up there and told him he would be a black stain on the history of America forever.
Okay. Exit. I'm now going to do the McLaughlin thing, and then we're going to go. Exit question. You guys don't even know I'm going to ask you this. 3 days to go. What are the odds that Joe Biden pardons his brother?
100%.
You have 100%. Okay, Christine's at 100%. That's before 12 p.m. Monday. Christine's at 100%. Abe?
Right there with her.
Okay, 100%. Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at like 90%. Yeah.
I'm probably
that's not 100.
Close to 100%.
Not 100, but I mean,
there was a bizarre story last night that came out from NBC News that Biden is thinking of pardoning Trump. Biden is thinking of pardoning Trump. Now, that, by the way, won't have any effect on the New York State decision in the Bragg case, because that's a state court decision. But Biden is thinking of pardoning Trump. That pushes me, if that story is true, that pushes me to 110%, because my idea would then be he's going to pardon his brother and Trump at the same time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being, Trump, we need a president who isn't haunted by blah, blah, blah. And then maybe if I pardon him, he won't fight so hard against legislation that says that he called for in the farewell address, saying that, presidents could be prosecuted for, crimes while in office. Though he put it in a very strange way. He said, there should be, you should have crimes in office. You shouldn't have crime. You should have crimes in office. Law should be passed that presidents have crimes in office or something like that, which is really a suitable conclusion to this.
And
anyway,
we beat Medicaid, whatever. I still don't know what that means.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway, enjoy the apparently 8 amazing football games that are going on this weekend. Of course, Monday is not only the inaugural, but is Martin Luther King Day, which is why we're taking the day. We will be back on Tuesday to assess the Trump inaugural, his speech, the first hostage releases, and other matters. So we will reconvene then. So for Seth, Abe, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the camera.